Ryan's in Belfast. Hello, Ryan.
Hello, Ian. Thank you very much for taking my call.
Hi, what would you like to say?
I like your show.
Thank you.
I would just like to quickly say something that I just heard you say there. I never thought that you were gay, and so I do hope that I don't plan on offending you in any way during this.
Well, don't worry. I'll tell you if you do.
Right, okay. But basically what I want to say is that I don't think that kind of thing has to be advertised in schools. You know, I've no issues with homosexuality at all. You know, I don't really care if somebody's gay, to completely tell you the truth. I don't really care. But I think that it's something that children should be able to figure out on their own. You know, I was never told about it. You know, I'm 17, so I'm not from like an older kind of generation, and I was never taught about it in school, so I wasn't. And so I just naturally came to kind of recognising it as to kind of what it is. However, I think that, for example, sex education, well, every single person in their life is going to go through that at some point. Well, I would say, apart from a very small amount of people in the world, but everybody is going to go through that. But only, for example, at least in the UK, there's a minority of gay or lesbian people. And so I don't think that it's productive to teach it to a class full of people who only, maybe even one or two people in that class might only be gay, if you know what I mean. So I can understand why a very religious person would take their child out of that class, but I could understand why a very religious person probably wouldn't take their child out of a sex education class, because it's very natural to everybody, if that makes sense.
Let's try and define our terms here, because I don't think anybody is suggesting that a 4 or 6-year-old should be taught about being gay. I think all that's being suggested is that they learn that there are different types of relationship, and that some people have parents who are male and female. That's the convention, that's the norm. But there are people who have single parents, whether it be a woman or a man, and there are people who have 2 mummies and 2 daddies. Now, I don't think that's teaching children about being gay. I just think it is recognising the relationships that their classmates will have with their parents. So I think we've got to define what we're talking about with younger children before we talk about whether older children should be taught about, well, I suppose gay sex is what we're talking about, isn't it? Now, and that we can understand that there are maybe differing views about that. But would you also, Ryan, say that maybe young children shouldn't be taught about racial equality?
Well, I can understand why you're linking that up to my logic, and I can understand that. But it's different teaching, for example, equality within the sexual orientations. For example, if actually, I think gay marriage is legal in this country, but if gay marriage wasn't legal,
is it?
It would be
I don't think it is in Northern Ireland, is it?
No, I don't think it's in Northern Ireland, but where you are, I'm pretty sure it is. And so I think it would be acceptable for older children, particularly for, you know, if they're teaching about racial equality, to teach about all equality, you know, women and men's equality, all types of equality, but without going into too much depth on a phone call, going into too much detail about the ins and outs of that kind of thing, I think would, this is going to sound very odd, but I think it would be enough to sway someone towards becoming a homosexual, because I'm a big believer that somebody can be swayed towards becoming a homosexual. Really? But I'm a believer that people who are gay cannot become straight. Because,
goodness.
For example,
right, Ryan, stop right there. I'm going to come back to you after the news, because I have to go to the news. But we need to have a little chat, Ryan.
What I was saying is, I just want to kind of reiterate that I don't plan on offending anyone. That's why I'm trying to phrase my words very carefully. Yep. That's what I'm planning to do here. And so I apologise in advance if anyone does take offence. However, what I was saying is that I believe that somebody can be persuaded, not necessarily persuaded, but kind of pushed in a direction, regardless of gender, into homosexuality. But I believe that somebody who is a homosexual cannot be brought out of it into becoming straight. So,
well, on the latter point, I agree with you. I think that you hear about all this sort of gay conversion therapy. And I was reading about somebody in America who practiced gay conversion therapy, who then came out as gay himself, which I thought was slightly ironic, but there we are. But on your first point about people being persuaded to become gay, do you not believe that people are either born with their sexuality or not?
Absolutely, I do, because I'm straight, and I believe that I was obviously born straight, but I do believe that it's fluid. It's somewhat fluid. I believe that I can't really explain it, but well, I'm on the radio, so I'm going to give it a try. But, I suppose that's why I called up.
Well, exactly.
But I do believe that somebody, for example, I am on a radio, so let's just say that, for example, people watch videos online and gay videos, if you know what I mean. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but if somebody watches a gay video opposed to a straight video, then I believe that would maybe convince somebody to maybe experiment, and if they never did that experimentation, then, because you kind of hear about it in university, it's more like an American thing. Well, we did some experimentation in college, that kind of thing.
We know that young people experiment in all sorts of different ways. Experimentation does not make you one thing or another. But going from that logic, though, if a gay person was to watch a straight video, then they could be persuaded to become straight. That's the logic of your argument, isn't it?
I completely understand that logic, but I've never ever heard of somebody that's been gay that's instantly became straight after watching a video. But I have heard, but I've actually heard of a couple of friends who are gay, and I've actually spoken to them, and I've asked them, so is this kind of how you were born, or is this how did it work? And they kind of said, I never really felt anything when I was younger, but I grown up and I started watching videos, and I kind of figured out what I liked that way. You know what I mean? And so if those kind of gay videos, particularly, for example, let's say they were banned. I'm not saying that should happen. Let's say they were banned, then I think that would lower the amount of homosexuality.
Really?
Homosexuals. But I don't think that's a bad thing. I don't think that having a high amount of homosexuals is a bad thing. I'm not saying that.
It really doesn't work that way, though. I think different people discover their own sexualities at different ages. I knew at the age of 8 that I wasn't like other boys. I knew that I was gay, even though I couldn't have articulated it at that age, but I just knew. Now, when I was that age, which of course was the early 1970s, it was very difficult for people to be open about their sexuality if you were anything other than what was considered the norm. And I didn't do anything about my sexuality until I was 28, believe it or not. I did a podcast earlier today with Giles Fraser called Confessions, so I'm in a kind of confessional mood. So, and I didn't come out to my parents until I was 40, something I bitterly regret. But they were different times. But I always knew, and I know that I was born the way I am, and I know that even though I had girlfriends in my teens and 20s, and I had genuine feelings for them, but I always knew that it wasn't really what I was, and I always stopped the relationships before they got to a certain point, if you get my drift. And do I regret now that I didn't really acknowledge what I knew at an earlier age? Of course I do. But I genuinely believe, and that people, and you're right, that there is nowadays, I think there is more of a sort of sexual fluidity. If you have a scale of 0 to 100, where 0 is straight and 100 is gay, very few people are at either extreme of that line, I guess. But most people are sort of more at one end, much more at one end than the other. And you're right, some people will experiment, but I really don't think that you can just put it down to videos.
Well, I would also like to bring up another point, if I may, that sort of sinks into this, if that's all right.
Yeah.
But this is, and I really, I'm right wing, as you probably would know, and so I'm a very believer in the kind of old fashioned ways, with the exception of this. I believe that homosexuals are all equal and all that kind of stuff. However, nowadays, I think, like, I don't know, 30, maybe 40 years ago, kind of when you were in the 50s, 60s, 70s, or anything before that, really, it was kind of taboo, wasn't it, about being anything that wasn't straight, and obviously that was completely wrong. However, my feeling is that those are, how do I say this without coming across as offensive, but the true homosexuals. And what I mean by that is the modern day younger, for example, maybe my generation, anything above 1990, or even 1985 probably, it's nowadays it's kind of cool to be gay, and it's hip because it's became so accepted, and obviously it should be accepted. But the amount of people nowadays are, and it's not just that, it's kind of like the non-binaries and transgender and all that kind of stuff. It's all becoming mainstream, and it's all becoming cool, you know, and you're not cool if you're straight, and you're cool if you're gay. And it's just, for example, a lot of Hollywood people are coming out and they're saying that they're this and that and this and that, and they're making it seem cool because they want loads and loads of other people, younger people, to come out as gay or as trans or whatever. And so I think that it's now becoming cool and hip. And so if we can establish a boundary that, basically the typical logic is that the mass is kind of somewhat, I don't want to say normal, but you know what I mean, and the minorities somewhat are a bit different. And if somebody's homosexual and someone's straight, they're different because they believe in different things, they do different things, they're attracted to different types of people, if that makes sense.
Well, I don't actually accept that, because I am a man who happens to be gay rather than a gay person who happens to be a man. I know that sounds odd, but my sexuality does not define my life. It doesn't. I'm interested in doing the same kind of things that straight men do. I go to football matches. I like cars. The stereotype of the effeminate gay, and yes, of course there are effeminate gays. The gay who will sort of prance around down the street and act in a very camp way. Now, most gay people do not do that, and I'm not sort of denigrating people that are camp, but it's if you live what I would call a normal, ordinary, everyday life, which I kind of, okay, you might think, well, you're on the radio, mate, you're on television, how can that be normal? You'd have a point. But generally, my life in my free time is very ordinary. It's exactly the same as most other people's. I do the same thing that most other people do. So my sexuality does not define me as a man in that way.
I completely agree. You know, I'm not saying that straight people can go to football and can go to rugby matches, and gay people need to go to I don't know. I'm trying to think of some kind of fashion shop, but it's not coming into my head. You know, gay people are these kind of flamboyant people who dress in pink and jump about, you know, and are very, very camp. I'm not saying that because I actually know very, very, very many gay people who you wouldn't even know, you know, unless you asked them or they told you.
Exactly.
And so,
do you know, going back to your initial point, do you know any gay people who actively try to persuade other gay people or other straight people to become gay? Because I've never met anyone who's done that. Now, we hear about all of these sort of grooming scandals and all the rest of it. But unfortunately, that then conflates homosexuality with paedophilia. And of course there are paedophile gays. I'm not going to deny that at all. But I don't think there are any more proportionately paedophile gays than straights. I think we have to separate those two things out. And I don't think that it's really possible to persuade someone to become gay if they don't have gay feelings in the first place.
I completely agree. However, someone who's older, who's straight, you know, anything over, like, I don't know, 20 or even the age of consent, like 16, somebody who's over the age of 16, I consider to be very mature and probably of sound mind, if that makes sense, and they can make their own decisions. However, anything below that, and it doesn't even need to be from adults, it could be from other peers who are gay, for example. I think it would be very, very easy to convince somebody of anything below the age of 16 to try it and become it. Do you know what I mean? I think it would be very, very easy to convince a child like that.
Well, we're going to have to disagree on that, because I mean, as we've said before, look, kids experiment. That just because they experiment, that doesn't mean to say that they are automatically then gay or more likely to become gay. Ryan, we have been talking for literally 20 minutes, which in talk radio terms is like a century. So I've really enjoyed our conversation. I think a lot of people would take issue with quite a lot of what you said. I hope you haven't offended. I hope you haven't offended anyone. I haven't been offended by anything that you've said, and I hope you've got something from what we both said.